Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quaker Parenting Podcast, brought to you by SouthJerseyQuakers. Today, I will be interviewing Lauren and Megan from Haddonfield Meeting. We live in a society where things like violence are omnipresent and often glorified in media, pop culture, and entertainment. So how do you talk to your children about Quaker values in regards to the aspect of violence in our society?
This is one of those things where I don't necessarily feel like, when we're having those conversations, like I'm bringing it up in a context of Quakerism, it's kind of like I already had these certain values that Quakerism also has, you know what I mean? And so, but it's not like, oh, we're Quakers, so therefore, X, Y, Z. As far as like specifically dealing with that stuff, it's super challenging. Like I'm definitely that parent that was like, from birth, like we're not going to have, toy guns in our house, like none of that kind of stuff. And we're not going to have anything to do with violence. And like my kids barely watched TV until my younger one started watching it earlier than my older one, because that happens. But, like they were watching like Winnie the Pooh. Like there was none of that. And yet, I'm sure you guys have like heard this before, they're still out in the yard, like trying to kill each other and pretending to shoot each other and all these things. And I'm like, how is this even possible? Like, how do they even know these things? Like, this is crazy. And like I was just saying, both of our older kids play Dungeons and Dragons now. They're Ben's 11, right? And Jack is 10. And, it's fighting, it's pretend, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of violence, and like that's what they like about it, you know what I mean? Like a lot of the kids, like I don't know about Ben, but like a lot of the kids, like they like the violence, they like the fighting. So as a parent trying to separate like what is just, I don't know, part of childhood or part of fantasy or part of versus like, we do not allow this in our house, you know what I mean? So I feel like, my husband and I have a lot of conversations with the kids about like, what's fantasy versus like real life. And I feel like usually they look at me like, duh, like obviously mom, like this is obviously just fantasy. Like why would you even think that I would ever think about, transferring this to real life? So like they think like we're crazy, but so I feel like we have these values of nonviolence, which we had before coming to Quakerism, but which led us to Quakerism, as opposed to like we came to Quakerism and then we're like, yay, nonviolence, like we should do that, and yeah, I don't really have an answer specifically to like how we deal with topics of, violence or not, because I don't know. I still feel like we're figuring it out. Our kids definitely know our views for sure, I think. But it's like wrestling with them along with like those, like just wanting, like having this desire to like act them out in a more like fantastical way, I guess. Anyway, I'm babbling, so I will let Lauren talk. I'm sure she has something less babbling to say.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely relate to a lot of what you were saying. And I think there is like this push-pull dynamic with letting kids explore their bodies, explore the world. And sometimes that means in rougher ways than we would prefer. But when I was initially listening to your question, I thought more about violence in terms of war and, I think of the Black Lives Matter movement and violence against, civilians or marginalized people and things like that. And so for me, I think I was just initially thinking of, talking to kids in ways that kind of value that they have a place in the world. They're full humans who make decisions about what they want to be doing with their lives and with each other and with their space. And part of that is seeking justice and seeking ways to ensure that kind of like playtime violence is just and normal and okay and doesn't cross a line with their friends, things like that. So I think I I was thinking a lot about consent and the difference between, the ways that we're violent with each other in play versus violent with each other in this like very real life, very scary way that certainly isn't consensual and certainly isn't okay. And
like you said, like with consent, I was gonna say, I feel like because our kids play together, like sometimes I feel like a lot of people, parents in our group are like, well, the line of like, is so-and-so enjoying this game? Does so-and-so want to be playing this game with you? You know what I mean? So practicing consent, even in those things where, not that it's less important, but it's less, I don't know, it's the smaller setting, kind of practicing those things like consent and making sure everyone involved wants to be doing this and is comfortable with this and is being protected in this space. So
yes, 100%. I think that a lot of what happens in those small, community settings like playtime or recess or whatever, they're learning about how to be in larger community spaces, how to advocate for one another, how to advocate for themselves. They're figuring out a lot of those really big topics and concepts just from interpersonal, relationships like that. So yeah, that was a bit of a ramble too, but that's what I was thinking.
What are some alternatives to violence that you've talked about with your children?
We just immediately comes to mind for me, so I'm jumping in, but we have a lot of like restorative justice models like built into our just like home system. So whatever the word is, like our family dynamics are built around that. We do a lot of mediation as a family. We sit around at a table. Like it sounds really lame, but like if there's a problem from something like, somebody poked, this is a big issue in our house where one child does not like to be poked and the other child has like a compulsive tendency to just like want to poke. And so we have meetings about that. We actually sit down and have formal discussions about what boundaries have been crossed or, how it makes each other feel, the facts of what's happened when there's been a wrong versus what we're feeling and how both are valid and both are important, but there's differences there. And and so like a neutral party who is usually a parent, but sometimes we've even had instances where a parent and child were having issues with each other. And so the other parent and child step in and be that neutral party to listen to what's happening and then come up with a way to move forward. So what does restoring justice look like? What does restoring relationships look like? And how do we continue to support each other and create a healthy dynamic? So all of that does sort of sound very formal, but they're just like these conversations sort of around our dinner table or sometimes in the living room, like wherever we're comfortable, sometimes in bed, where we're just kind of processing out loud everything that's happening and or has happened when there's been conflict, and trying to find like the healthiest path forward rather than like, you don't punch your brother in the face. It's like, well, how do we respond in that really intense and heated moment then? If I don't get to punch somebody in the face, like, what do I get to do then? What does justice actually look like if I've been wronged? Like all of those things are just kind of life skills. And so we make a really intentional point to kind of have formal and informal ways of exploring those things as a family when conflict arises. So that's what came to mind.
Yeah, similar. Like one thing we use with our kids, just with each other, is this. We'd say this like a million times a day. Is talk, walk, ask. Like you can talk to your sibling, you know what I mean, and try to talk it through on your own. If that is not working, you can walk away if you feel like that's enough. Like sometimes that's not enough because like just walking away is not resolving it. Sometimes it is. It's just like we just need space. And ask is asking, obviously, like the neutral party, for help. So I'm not saying it always works. But like I said, we literally say that like a million times a day, like talk, walk, ask, talk, walk, ask. And then something you said, about restoring relationship. We literally were just like going through this like 5 minutes ago, with like one of my kids. And I feel like it's like working, like you're in in a way, it's like you assume the one committing violence is like the wronged party and they're upset. So they're like lashing back. So like, it's important to work with that child on like a more appropriate, I hate that word, but you know what I mean, response. But also to work with like the offending child about what they could have done differently and what they can do now. So like, we just had the situation where my older child was the offending party, and he just was getting into this mode of like, I'm terrible, all this kind of stuff, and like this kind of self-loathing thing, which is not healthy for him. But also we were trying to tell him like, it's not like productive in this situation. Like, what can you do in this situation to make amends? You know what I mean? Like, and we're like, I mean, these are like two kids. So we're like, you know, you can apologize to your brother, you can, you know, apologize to him, and, you know, say after D&D, like maybe we can go do XYZ for 15 minutes or whatever it is, you know? So working with like the offending and the offended, I guess, on both sides, you know, to figure out how you could have prevented the situation or what could have been done differently. And now that it's happened, how we can restore, you know, relationship with each other in this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to jump back on that as well and say that I think what often comes out of our conversations when we do take the time to really mediate in the middle of conflict, or after someone has erupted in violence, which has occasionally occurred in our house, is that we've realized the system is broken. And so it does, you know, point to larger issues in society, you know, that when systems are broken, that's what tends to happen, is that people are wronged, people don't know how to respond when they're wronged, and it's just very, very messy. And that same thing happens in our house. So somebody was really anxious, somebody needed more support and they didn't get it. Somebody, you know, said something that really hurt the other person. I mean, it's all kinds of just interpersonal dynamic stuff. But there was something 10 steps before the violence occurred or the conflict got intense that should have occurred. Somebody should have stepped in and helped out, or a child could have chosen a different, you know, response 10 steps ago, and it would have prevented something really, you know, bad, whatever. But that system got messed up for whatever reason. And a lot of the times what comes out of that is recognizing as parents what we need to do better moving forward. So it's not even just like, wow, that kid really messed up, and we need to make sure that we're righting those relationships between children or siblings. But also it's an opportunity to look at what we need to be doing better as parents. Like, are we listening closely enough? Are we examining our own responses or our own tendencies to get frustrated and maybe lash out in ways that don't look like physical violence, but might be intense for a young person, and, you know, restore the family system and make that healthy and whole as well. So I was just thinking about that as Megan was finishing up.
Going off like growth as a parent too, like my husband and I have talked about this, how there are definitely situations where like my older son tends to be like the poker, the instigator, and then my younger one tends to be the one who like erupts into like violence or screaming or whatever. And like, as a parent, like when you do this enough times a day, like there are moments where you just want it to stop. Like you don't care about resolving, you don't care about restoring relationship. You're like, I just want this screaming to stop right now, and I will do anything to make it stop. You know what I mean? And sometimes that means like being unfair to my older son, because maybe in this situation he hasn't even really done anything to make him scream, but like you're just like, I don't care, like just do something to make him stop. You know what I mean? And so it's definitely like challenging as a parent, especially when it's like, you're not just doing this once a day, you're doing this like 20 times a day, like every day for like 18 years, you know what I mean? And it's definitely like an opportunity to like, and I could see like the parallels between kind of like larger society of like when conflicts are like kind of like you just want it to stop, as opposed to like getting to the deeper issue, like Lauren said, of like what caused the conflict, and even not even in this moment, like 10 steps ago, you know what I mean? Like the entire system, you know, is broken. And so yeah, a lot of opportunities for growth as a human. This is my 6-year-old. Can you say hi, Ray? Hi.
Conversations around politics are among the most talked about subjects that adults have. Some of these conversations may elicit fear, helplessness, misunderstanding, and insecurity. How do you speak to children in regards to the subject surrounding these conversations regarding politics and whatnot? Or do you, in that case?
So I feel like this is interesting, and it's one of the questions I was thinking about before, or the topics, because I feel like Lauren and I actually have done this very differently with our kids, which is interesting, because I feel like we're like, obviously like really good friends, but like, especially when our kids were younger, took like a very different, approach or whatever. Like me definitely being on the more like sheltering end, and Lauren being more on the more, being open with her kids more about these topics when they were at younger ages. And the interesting thing as far as sort of relating to Quakerism is that I feel like, I don't know if it was the reason I came to Quakerism. Maybe it was part of it. I don't know. But something that I have found, sorry, other child is here. In 5 minutes, honey, I'll get you set up, is that it has helped me find ways to be more open with my kids about those things in sort of age appropriate ways, I guess. Like before it just felt like overwhelmed, like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not ready to go there with my kids. So it's either go there and it feels like too much, or don't go there at all. And so we just like didn't go there at all for the most part. Whereas like, I feel like with Quakerism and different, through different programs or things we've been to, like youth programs, I feel like it's opened me up to different resources for approaching those topics with kids in ways that feel like they're not overwhelming, like they're at the level that they're at. They're kind of meeting them where they're at. So I feel like that's been something good about Quakers. For me, like even last night, here's like an example. Both of our younger kids were on the devotionals they do through PYM. It's like every Tuesday and Thursday. It's like mostly directed towards like preschool, elementary kids, I guess. And it's basically like they read a picture book, they talk about it briefly. Sometimes I sing a song and like the end, you know what I mean? It's like really cute, really short. But they read this book about like a nativity scene, and a kid saw it and was like, why does Jesus have like blonde hair and blue eyes in this? And like, that doesn't seem right. And this whole thing. And at the end, like the whole class, it was first graders, and my kid's in first grade. So I feel like you really like identify with this. They came in and they all had like a doll they had from home, and they all looked different, you know what I mean? Different color hair and eyes and skin and all these things. And they all put their doll in the manger, you know what I mean? And then it talked about like everyone belonging and whatever. So it wasn't some big political thing per se, you know what I mean? It wasn't like this is what happened in the news today, but it was like giving a message that could influence the way you think about those things. And I can't remember exactly what my son said about like what he thought was the most important thing, but he definitely like got it, you know what I mean? So even just like certain picture books as resources, or making space, Quakers might like makes space for those kids, for kids to have those conversations in a way that's at their level. So it's definitely been something that with my family has, gotten out of Quakerism. And I still struggle with the politics thing. Like, it's funny. I know I'm going a long time, but I feel like I was very influenced as like a younger parent, I'm old, by Waldorf education philosophies, which are very much about like protecting the child when they're young. And I actually have a friend who homeschools, both of us homeschool, just as an aside. I have another homeschooling friend who has 5 kids, and they use the Waldorf philosophy. And so she's very into protecting her kids from media and news and stuff at a young age. But her family are like huge activists. I mean, like the whole family, and 3 of her kids are teens and 2 are still young. And so like, and she's someone I sort of admire. And so I was like, oh, like I'm seeing that this is like working. It's not because her kids weren't protected when they were young, and now they're like clueless. Like her teenagers are like heavily involved in politics and activism, whatever. So that was like an example. And like, well, okay, like maybe it's okay to protect them for a while. And then sort of like slowly like transition into like, introducing these topics. But then I look at someone like Lauren, who did it a lot earlier, and like her kids are doing great too. So it's just like there is no one way is the answer, But I will say, to go back to my original point, was just that I do feel like it's one way that Quakerism has been a positive for my family, kind of giving me resources and spaces to both introduce and like continue discussions of those topics with my kids in, I don't want to say age appropriate, but like safe ways, or I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say? I'll stop talking.
Yeah, I relate that Quakerism has given us space for that kind of community, which has been really important to me. Like Megan mentioned, I was, already kind of immersing my children in conversations about tough topics, conversations about politics. I led groups for young children to be involved in marches and protests and other, politically involved spaces. They're writing letters to, representatives and things like that. Well, my younger one is just learning how to write, but is doing those things as part of just growing and learning about what it means to be in the world and what it means to be in community, at all the levels, right? So our state and our nation are just extensions of that. So they've always been immersed in politics and in justice work and learning about like those complicated like nuances as often as they had questions or as often as they were just exposed to it tangentially from showing up to meetings or showing up to marches and things like that. But what I valued about Quakerism was that it did seem like there was a space where kids could continue to explore that from a faith perspective, and also, be immersed in community with other kids who were interested in doing that work, or with parents who were interested in their kids getting involved in those discussions. I think I really valued that Quakers seem to be like walking the walk a little bit more than folks from other faith perspectives. I'm somebody who worked in churches of a different denomination before heading over here. And I just saw a different way of being when it came to having tough conversations or having very real conversations about the way the world is with young people. In Quaker spaces. So I've really valued that Quakers don't seem to be hiding kids from big topics or tough topics and conversations about the way faith is an extension of or is involved in the way we process all of this, and that it just sort of flows and is part of this like intentional space that we've created for our whole community, including kids. I feel like in Quaker spaces, kids aren't like shooed off the same way that they are in other church spaces or faith, communities. They're a little bit more immersed in the community as just any old member who shows up. And I appreciate that they can be present for conversations or messages that, maybe go over their head a little, but they've got, time and space to process it afterwards or with parents, with each other. Yeah, that was a bit of a ramble, but I really valued that. Like when I was seeking faith community, that Quakerism seemed like a space we could fit in as people who were already having meaningful conversations about politics and justice work and what it means to be a person of faith in the world. I felt like it was just a natural fit for us when we showed up.
As a follow-up, what do you do and how would you react if and or when your children have political beliefs that differ from your own?
I don't, like, it's so funny. Like, that's a question, like, it's so far from my mind at this point, I guess, because my kids are young. I mean, my kids are 6 and 10. I feel like it's a tough question, and it's, a very relevant or timely question, I guess. Not even related to my kids, but it's sort of a question that's come up with my kids lately, not in relation to them per se having different political beliefs. Because at this point, it's like I feel like whatever we say, they're like, they're into it for the most part. But with them in terms of like my kids being very condemning of people with different political beliefs, like my kids are like the biggest, like anti-Trumpers. And like when they hear some, like, it's just like, they're disgusted, and so having to like have those conversations with them about other people with different beliefs. And the interesting thing is, my husband and I have actually had some like disagreements about this, about tolerance for different beliefs in the sense of like, what is that? It's like a famous quote about like, we can believe different things unless it's like, I'm talking about, challenging my existence or my humanity. Like, the thing, I'm totally butchering this, you know what I mean? And so my husband is much more like, we have to be tolerant of everyone. And, we're not going to win people over by like being angry at them or putting them down. And like, and there's value to all those things he's saying. But like, I'm also at the point where like, there are certain things that I'm just like, no, you know what I mean? Like that's just not acceptable. Like, it's just not acceptable. You know what I mean? And so trying to like have those conversations with my kids, not about their different political beliefs, but about other people with different political beliefs than them. And then our family. And there are people in our family, not in this house, but like in our more extended family who do have different beliefs. And like, yeah. We haven't seen those people recently because of COVID, but like there definitely is a fear of mine of what my kids are going to say around those people, because they're quite judgmental in some of their beliefs lately. So I'm not completely answering the question, but yeah, I guess my answer would be like, I feel like it would be challenging for me, maybe even more so than my husband, if my kids had different political beliefs than me, depending on what they were. You know what I mean? Like, because there are definitely certain things that are, yeah, just so, yeah, just even, I mean, it depends how you define political, but feels even goes beyond political, you know what I mean? But your political beliefs are challenging other people's right to exist, as humans, you know what I mean? And like, I don't know what I would do, but I would certainly find it difficult.
Yeah, so far in our family, we do seem to have really similar perspectives. My kids are really vocal about those perspectives, and with each other and with friends online or whatever. We actually heard our 11-year-old giving a little bit of a lecture on Fortnite to another child who was rambling about all lives matter, and he kind of shut it down, which was sort of amusing to like hear from the other room. But yeah, and that's in line with what I would hope he would do, and also what I think we've sort of been teaching in terms of our own values or that kind of thing. But I think we approach things in a way that when we're first talking about really tough topics, like in a way that allows them to really think critically. Like we don't say, this is what we believe in, or this is how we're voting, and just leave it as like a blanket statement. If the kids have a question about, a specific political stance or, belief system or something, my first response is to ask them how they feel about it. What do you already know about this? And what are your current feelings about it? What do you think? Or what have friends said, and how does that make you feel? So I'm more interested in hearing them and watching them develop their own belief systems rather than me impose my own. I have hopes and strong feelings about where I'd like them to end up. And I would be disappointed if they had vastly different political beliefs than me, because I feel so strongly about my own. But, but I want them to come to things on their own. I'm creating space that I hope helps them think critically, and also immersing them in space, both Quaker community and, you know, spaces with strong activists as leaders and stuff, that I hope they're thinking critically while they're in these spaces, and will come to perspectives that that value other people and advocate for marginalized people, and you know, are kind of progressive and really you know, doing what needs to be done to push the world in a more just, you know, direction. But if they miss the mark sometimes, or, you know, whatever, I think I also would hopefully just be patient with them to continue asking questions about why they landed on that, you know, specific stance, and learning more with them, maybe guiding them if it was necessary, or sharing why I definitely share why I believe certain things if they have questions about that. And hopefully that guides them too, so that they can see why I landed where I did. But I think it's all about like mutual respect and extending that to young people, no matter how old they are, or, you know, what their beliefs are. If they're in a different space than I am, I want to understand that more, rather than try to impose, you know, my own perspectives. 'Cause hopefully, you know, over time, that will help us both grow as individuals. I think all people, no matter how old you are, like, need space to grow with certain topics and concepts and belief systems. And so I can't expect anybody to be exactly where I am. And I'm not even saying exactly where I am is perfect either. So I think we all as people need to give young people, super old people, like people who have different belief systems than us, whatever, space to grow and to learn more, and be patient with that. I don't think that means like justifying, you know, problematic stuff in any way. I think there can be a level of accountability, you know, upheld while also being patient with people. So I'm not ever saying that it's okay to just excuse problematic behavior or belief systems that enable problematic behavior. But I do think, you know, there are systems that we can put in place that allow both to be possible in terms of accountability and leaving space for growth and guidance and that kind of thing.
So what do you think makes Quaker parenting different from that of your peers?
So like we said, I touched on a little bit about this earlier, but I guess to speak to like how I came to Quakerism kind of covers the question. I was looking for a community for our family, you know, like our whole family too. Cause I feel like, you know, we have like homeschooling community where it's just like me and the kids. And then I have like mom community or whatever, but I was looking for like a whole family community that like shared our values, but also had like a spiritual maybe element to it. So there was kind of like these three things that I was looking for. And it's interesting to think about how does it differ from other parents I know. I feel like pretty much all the parents I know are very progressive, which makes sense because those are the people that I'm friendly with. And so I don't know that as far as like those topics or values, you know, like my Quaker parenting is a lot different than the parenting of my, you know, non-Quaker friends. I will say now that it's just coming to me now, like the spiritual element is probably very different. It's interesting because I'm going to say in the homeschooling community, but it's probably true just in the parenting community in general. You are either, I guess I'll say in the homeschooling community, like a super conservative Christian who is homeschooling because of that reason, or you are a super liberal, progressive, completely secular person who is homeschooling for different reasons. And there's not really a lot of people in the middle. You know what I mean? Like I feel if you like, you know, mention like progressive political topics to the conservative religious people, you're like, you know, ousted. Or if you mention like religion or like spiritual things, maybe to like some of the secular folks, like you don't really fit in there. Like there's certain kinds of like religion-y things that are accepted, you know, like you could maybe be spiritual but not religious, or you could, you know what I mean? Like like there's certain things that would be okay, but like, I don't know, you certainly couldn't mention like Jesus or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're just like, it's weird. Like, there's this very divided feeling. And so being like a progressive minded person politically, but then someone with like more drawn to like whatever spiritual religious spaces, like combining those things and then wanting my whole family to be involved, like finding all that in one space was like kind of what I was looking for. And also back to the original question about, you know, like my parenting, wanting the support of that kind of community in my parenting, you know? And so when I started looking, like, to be honest, I was like, okay, Quakers, you know, like this looks good. And I had some experience with Quakers because I went to a Quaker college. And then I was like, Unitarians look okay. And so we were going to try them both. And we like went to Quakers first because honestly, it was closer to our house. Like that was the reason why we went to meeting first. And we liked it and kept going and just never made it over to the, you know, Unitarians. And so, so yeah, I guess it's like the combination of all of those elements that maybe makes my parenting a little different than some of my non-Quaker friends. Like it has the community, it has the, you know, kind of like progressive activisty values, and those values are, have a spiritual or religious connection or basis to some extent, you know what I mean? So I feel like, yeah, and I just haven't found that a lot in other circles or relationships or communities or whatever. So that's all I've got.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember, sorry, just one more aside, because this is kind of a funny thing. So Lauren and I, like I mentioned, our kids are in this Dungeons and Dragons group, and they've been playing in the same group for 3 years, the same kids. And normally it meets at my house, but now it meets online because of COVID. So every Wednesday it was like the same kids and then the same parents and then the same siblings, like for several hours on Wednesdays. And when I first got involved in Quakerism, Lauren and I kind of got involved at the same time, and we would be like chatting about it, and like maybe the other parents would ask questions. And I don't know if you remember this, but I found one time one of these parents was asking about it, and it either was like overtly being judgmental, or maybe I just felt it about the religious aspects of it. And afterwards, Lauren texted me and was like, basically like, own that shit. Sorry, I know you're not gonna put this on a video, but like, you know, like don't be embarrassed if that's like who you are. You know what I mean? Like, don't like try to, yeah, I don't know, play up the progressive part, but downplay the religious part, because like that's not acceptable in these like certain circles, you know, like this combination of things is like who you are and like what you value. So just like, you know, just be out there with it or whatever. So I feel like that kind of speaks to like the bring together these different values that I've had trouble finding a lot of people who do, I guess. So anyways, thanks, Lauren.
Yes, own it. Yeah, I mean, I relate a lot to what Megan was saying about looking for this like magical space where you're allowed to be spiritual and allowed to be interested in the Bible, allowed to be, you know, seeking a spiritual path and growth in that way, while also being really progressive and being mindful of the ways that institutions, you know, have been harmful. Because I think in a lot of progressive spaces, that's something folks are willing to talk about and stuff, but not willing to say, well, is there a place for these kinds of institutions in our life? Like a lot of people would walk away from organized religion because they were harmed in some way by an institution. I'm one of those people, but, you know, seeking and finding a way for these like intentional community spaces to still function is something that I think a lot of the folks Megan and I know we're not necessarily interested in doing. For me, I was also seeking, you know, a space where, like, as somebody who's always been really spiritual, was on the path to become a pastor in a different denomination before leaving that denomination, and then not doing anything for a while, and really like sitting with and seeking what was coming next. You know, it was important to me that I made like the right decision, I guess, with you know, in terms of where I landed for that kind of community. So I was really cautious when I did show up, and it took, I think, many months for me to feel like, okay, I think this is going in the right direction. But what I was really looking for was a space where we could all kind of ask questions together. And I like that there isn't this like one authority figure when it comes to the way meeting is run. Everybody's messages are valued. Everybody's perspectives are able to be shared. And it was really important to me that we found a space that empowered all of its members in that way. And so for me, that also includes young people. And so to know that the perspective of a very young person would be valued in the same way as the oldest, most seasoned, you know, person in the room is also really important to me. So I think Quaker spaces offer that, but with such like intentional like ritual about it, that's also comforting, and it builds it in. It makes sure that it's happening in a way that other faith communities don't. You know, they don't make sure that there's time and space to ask questions as an entire community together, and value all voices in that way. And so I think that was something that for me was really different. I mean, and other things too, in terms of the way those values sometimes are represented, just like as they kind of carry over into everyday life. But that whole like empowerment and valuing all voices thing was really important to me. And I think it shows up in parenting as it trickles out into the weekdays. But yeah, it's such a ritualistic and important and intentional part of Sundays or whenever you're gathering that I like that.
How do you deal with conflict within your family, and how does it relate to, does Quaker process help with that?
I mean, I feel like we talked about this a little bit before about, I mean, I was going to say both of us talking about like, yeah, just the intentionality of having conversations and, you know, either during or after the fact. Again, like I don't know that Quakerism has like influenced the way we do that. It's more like we were kind of doing that and then going to Quakerism, a space that, like Lauren was saying, values all voices and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, oh, like this feels right because this is aligned with what we kind of were already doing, as opposed to the other way. And again, like I haven't been in Quakerism for that long, and like, you know, half of that time has been on Zoom, you know, so like maybe more over time, like that influence will go, you know, in both directions. At this point, as far as this very specific topic, like conflict within my family, I feel like it's more been just like that space felt right because it aligned with what we were already doing, as opposed to like, I went to Quakerism and I was like, oh, like this is what I should, you know, this is what I should be doing. And like, it was like a complete, you know, overhaul, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I relate to that. I don't want to, I would probably just be reiterating like a lot of what I said before, and there's a loud sander in the background, so I'm going to remute.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. I hope to have you back sometime. This concludes the Quaker Parenting Podcast, brought to you by South Jersey Quakers.